Number 2. The characters. It is one thing that Tomino does well, especially Tomino Gundam, is have a good cast of characters. Even some of his weaker series, he does have a couple of characters that I actually liked. And I'm happy to report that G-Reco is no exception. There are some good characters in G-Reco, but not the ones that you think. Surprisingly, the best character of all G-Reco is none other than the space Karen, Willem? Or Belle's mom. Sure, she's a Karen, and also a religious nut, but there is a lot more to her than just blind faith. In fact, she's willing to go against the Capital despite them being a bigger authority. She's the only person besides the Space Pope that generally believes what she thinks is right, while also having a personal connection with her son. She was one of the 2 characters I felt captivated by, and she's a space Karen.
That's not a good sign.
But if you're gonna talk about the characters, we should at least talk about the core cast at least. Starting with Bellery? Zaraya? Belle. And Ida? Surgeon? Sturgeon?
I am a surgeon!
Ida. Now I know it's kind of strange to talk about these 2 characters at the same time, but trust me, it will make sense later on. Now Belle's part of the Capital Guard, which are basically the police of the Capital Territory.
Help! Police! Help! Help!
While Ida is more of a space pirate, and doesn't consider herself part of the American Army despite her father being the general. Though it turns out later that they're actually part of the American Army, but they're actually more like privateers. Anyway, I already mentioned the fact these characters do not get along at all. In fact, they butt heads a lot. But the dispute only gets worse when Belle uses the G-Self to kill the captain of the American pirates. Though it turns out that was actually Ida's lover slash boyfriend. And understandably, she's upset by this.
僕が殺した。
愛はアメリア軍を背負っていける人だったんです。熱血漢で優しくて優れた大人だったんです。そのコックピットを元に戻してください。そしてカーヒルを生き返らせて。カーヒルと戦えたあなたならそのくらいのことできるでしょ。ベルリゼナム。
そりゃ無理です。
And you can tell where the relationship is going. When Belle is forced to join with the Amerians, Ida constantly hopes that Belle will die in the battle to avenge her boyfriend. It doesn't happen though, and she often gets upset by this.
なんであの子にあんなことができて、私がいけないわ。
That is until Belle was forced to kill his own teacher, and he gets torn up by this and is now in a pit. Ida finds out about this and has some bit of a conscience. She even gets a good old nightmare about it.
多少の才能は認めますが、その選ぶった性格は海賊部隊で直して差し上げます。直してくださらなければ、怖くて私がプロポーズできません。
And afterwards, he slowly becomes more nicer to Belle and actually becomes more sympathetic towards him. And throughout the anime, the two's relationships slowly grow together, and they may even fall in love, which technically they kinda do.
焦って飛び出して死ぬなよ。恋を知ったんだ。誰が死ぬもんか。
And you might think this is going to be more like a Romeo and Juliet type of scenario, having 2 different people fall in love at different sides. No! You see, by the time you went to Toa Sanga, it turns out they're not related to their parents after all, but both adopted. It also turns out is that they're not from Earth after all, but they're both from Toa Sanga. It also turns out that they're actually part of the Ray Hutton family, and what's even better is that they're actually siblings. So wait, you mean that entire time when they both admitted that they love each other, that means that...
Don't.
Remember when they had a romantic moment in the Amazon and they both seemed to be falling in love?
No. No.
And what's stranger is that whatever version you're watching, it gets, well, kind of confusing. Because in the show version, they kind of get over it really quickly. That is until the next episode where Beryl gets torn up that he's a Ray Hutton.
アイーダさんが姉さんだなんて言われたらいい加減おかしくなるだろう。何がレイハントンだ。
That is until the next episode when he had to pick up trash.
了解。
Well, in the movie version, it's a little bit better. Ida's upset that her brother killed her boyfriend, and Belle's upset because he discovers that he has no free will after all, being orchestrated by his own parents and these 2 old farts.
笑っちゃうよ。
And the only reason why they get to talk to each other again is that Belle's friend Dorito gives him a pep talk to talk to his sister, while also mentioning that she won the waifu war.
恥ずかしい。
俺ど
Soon after they talk to each other again, which is a little bit awkward, but they have a heart-to-heart and start bonding again. And Ida even accepts her boyfriend's death by giving Belle the marble, which is actually a pretty nice moment. It shows that Ida is able to grow as a person, and they both accept each other as brother and sister. Do they actually mention how awkward it was that they fell in love with each other? No. But it still gave us a nice moment at the end. Anyway, you'd think this is where their arc would end, right?
Wrong!
There's another lesson they have to learn, and that's perspective. Remember when I said earlier that your own values and beliefs are really just your own perspective of what you're raised at? Well, that's the big lesson Ida learns here. Throughout the entire run, Ida was constantly on her side of the pond and thinks her perspective is right, just like the Amerians. Only until later on, she finds out that it's not as simple as it seems, and what she's arguing is just an American perspective.
そのように教わってお育ちになったのですな。
教えられた？自分で感じたことではないってことだよ。
In other words, it's really just her cultural bias. And she slowly accepts the fact there's other things to looking at than just her perspective. It was actually one of the more intriguing moments of G-Reco. A character with a black and white view of the world, slowly understanding that it's more gray than she seems, is really interesting. And she does grow as a character thanks to it. The only problem is, this would be a way better message if the other characters experience this. Like with that scene of the Crescent ship, everyone accuses her for looking at everything through an American lens.
アメリア人の感覚だけで喋るな。喋るな。
But guys, a while ago, you guys would look at things from a Capitol Tower lens.
違いますよ姉さん。人は自然界のリズムに従うものです。
It also doesn't help that the fact you're all religious. Which, isn't that also a bias too? Like, I get it, it's political biases everywhere. But the thing about religion is that it's also based on culture. So wouldn't logically it would also apply to them? Again, the truth is that it's a simple political issue, when the whole thing is much more complicated than that, especially when culture is involved. And again, I'm not saying that politics are not involved, but it seems like it's only politics that are involved here. And it kind of makes them like a bunch of hypocrites. You're looking at things through an Armenian lens. Well, I'm sorry Miss is part of a culture that's actually based on a major religion around the planet. Yeah, I'm not biased at all either. And this applies to everyone else too, including Belle, which you would think she'll learn this too, but nah, it's only Ida. I know about you, but it makes you all like hypocrites. Especially when she's the only one that learns the lesson. Would it make more sense if they all learned the lesson by the end? Maybe having some more character development? Sure, Ida learns from this and actually grows as a character, but no one else does, especially her brother. And that's the main problem. While Ida does grow as a character, the other characters, especially Belle, stay more the same. He doesn't seem to learn or change or anything. Even some significant events, he doesn't really change. The biggest example is where he gets the equivalent of a fucking nuke. Now it is kind of retarded anyway, and the series just uses it and doesn't get brought up again. While in the movie it's actually played more as a big deal, and it does affect Belle, since he almost killed everyone on both sides.
絶対兵器だなんて冗談じゃないよ。こんなものは使っちゃならないんだ。
You would think these events will actually affect the character to a degree at least. But no, Belle just stays more the same.
僕はこれで地球を回る。
I'm not saying it's a bad thing for this type of character to exist, nor am I not saying that Belle should be a depressed old man by the end. He can be still chipper and happy by the end of the story. But what I am saying is that if you're gonna have a series that's about like, you know, a character changing throughout the end, at least have some change in the end. Belle doesn't feel like he has changed. At least with Ida, she did feel like she had some kind of change. Belle doesn't really feel like he has changed. He just feels more the same. Speaking of which, Naruto is another character that felt like more the same by the end. I'm not gonna talk about her too much, since she really doesn't do much of anything anyway. Basically, she's the frambo of the team. Only this time she takes care of a giant child instead of taking care of 3 smaller childs. She has her moments though. She has a slingshot that comes in handy, and she does have some of the religious beliefs like Belle, but is a bit more vocal about it. But like Belle, she doesn't really change. She just stays the same old bitch from earlier. She does help the giant child and wants to be a nurse afterwards, but it doesn't really go anywhere, and the movie is just basically absent. Now let's just say they didn't want to go that romantic route and just make her a single character. Then why not just make her have a friendship with other characters? Like, I don't know, the giant child you took care of, and maybe having some, I don't know, character development? You could have done all of that, But this is all you come up with? Man, she always gets screwed, doesn't she? Was it more important to make her a cheerleader in the end? Oh yeah, I forgot. Now we go to the giant child, or in this case, Mariah Monday. Now at the start, she conveniently has no memories at all due to oxygen deprivation. And because of that, she acts like a big baby. May I remind you that Mariah acts like this halfway through the anime, but she also has an intriguing mystery. She was the former pilot of the G-Self, and nobody knows where she comes from. We don't know if she comes from the Amerians or the Capital Territory. Why is she visiting Earth? What does the G-Self have to do with all of this? What's the connection with them and Ida and Belle?
What could it be?
Of course we know now, but in all fairness, it was an intriguing mystery. That is until she got her memories back. Despite her being important to the first part of the story, by the time she gains her memories back, she becomes less important to that story and becomes less interesting as a result.
My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
And to clarify, it's not the fact it's not the mystery that I wanted, it's more the fact that they don't do anything with it at all. For example, her connection with Ida and Belle could be interesting, but they don't do anything with it by the end, while also accidentally making a plot hole. Remember earlier when they said the G-Self can only be piloted by Belle and Ida because of their genes? If that's the case, how come Mariah is able to pilot it? If she's able to pilot, does that mean they're related? And if that's also the case, why was that not also part of the story? Another example being her connection with the doctor lady. Now keep in mind, they say they've been connected for years. But by the time she betrays him to the G-It, it doesn't get brought up at all to her. As a matter of fact, they only talk to each other once and that's it. Another instance is her relationship with Ringo, the Toa-Sangan pilot they captured. Now given the fact they're both Toa-Sangans, you would think there would be some connection there, maybe having some conflict, or hell, maybe growing a better relationship. But if that's what you thought it was going to be, then...
No.
They do have a relationship technically, but it's more about Ringo sipping over Mariah. She doesn't even get a relationship with Narita, and you would think she would, given the fact she was the one that took care of her. But they don't even do that.
What the fudge pickle?
There's so much potential with this, and they don't do anything with it at all. And it's even more frustrating that it was one of the first scenes in G-Reco that implies that she would be very important, and yet she isn't. I guess it was more important to her being simped over by two guys. I guess that was more important to the story. Now you go to the good characters, Clem, Nick, and Mick Jack. Now you probably know Clem best from the I Am a Genius meme. But if you've seen this meme, you already know what his character is. He's basically a pseudo-intellectual, where he thinks he's really smart, but in reality he's a dumbass. Most, if not all, his plans are always a disaster waiting to happen. So much so that even the other characters acknowledge this. Even Midchuck realizes this. But somehow she's attracted to his stupidity. A lot of people say they're like the Bonnie and Clyde of the anime. Which, while it's not an unfair comparison, they never really steal or rob anything, and they're always on the side of the Amerians. They do occasionally fight the heroes, especially in the Toa-Sanga arc, but really they don't really fight each other that much. Which you would think they would, given the fact they're kinda like anti-heroes. The thing that I'm surprised at is that you would think these characters would not last that long, given the fact they fucked up constantly. I mean, it's a Tomato Gundam series after all. But no, they both managed to survive at the very end. You think they won't last that long, but they're there. That being said, they're really not that interesting characters. I mean, Midjack's hot, and she has a thing for Clem, but that's really it. And Clem is hot, but he's also stupid, and that's really it. There is a little plot point where he's the son of the American president, Zucchini, but they don't do anything with it. But that's okay though. By the end of the series, Clem just used the entire Crescent ship to run over his father just because he was in the conflict. Now Mask is an interesting case. Ignoring the fact that he looks like he has 4 eyes, he's actually one of the better characters of G-Reco, but he has a lot of missed potential. And yes, he's another case of the Char Club, which honestly seems to be more of an obligation than a creative choice. Which for one, Char is popular, and 2, they need to make that money, all of which have varying results. And Tomato's guilty of this, though in fairness he tries to mix it up for a bit. turning Gundam's Harry was actually a subversion of that trope. But with Mask, he seemed to be more like a worser version of Char. With Char, he actually does win a couple battles against Amuro, especially during the first half. It's only until the later half where Amuro has more experience and Char has some struggle with him. But with Mask, every time I see him, he always loses. He never wins any battles with Bell, due to either stupidity, some weird logical shit, and simply just bad luck. The only time that Mask almost won was the movie, but even then, he got his ass kicked a lot during that battle, and he almost died if it weren't for his crazy stalker saving him. So I wasn't really that impressed with him. However, his motivation's a bit more interesting, but also confusing, and it's all because he's a fucking Kuntala. Now you might be thinking, what the hell is a Kuntala? Well, long story short, apparently they were there in the end of the Universal Century, as food at one point. Which, damn, I knew the Universal Century sucked, but I never knew it was that bad. Well, the good news is they don't need to worry about becoming food now. What they need to be worried about is their position, because Kuntalas are not really well treated in the Reguiled Century. As a matter of fact, Mask is the only Kuntala that has managed to gain a high position of power. And what Mask is trying to prove, that he can do everything that everyone else can, despite his origins. Which, let's be fair here, is not a bad message. And it can be interesting for this type of character. But here's the problem. They don't really explain what a Kuntala is, or even explore it at all. Now earlier I mentioned the fact they were food at one point and they get discriminated by that. But the thing is, they also have a culture. For example, when Mask gets this new mobile suit, he names it after the goddess of their own religion. Which would be interesting if it wasn't in the end of the anime. Like, we're only hearing about this information now than earlier. Which, if you're gonna explain that these guys actually have a culture, then why was it not explored at the start?
I don't get it.
And we don't even know what makes a Kuntala a Kuntala. Like, we have Mask, obviously, but then we have characters like Manny, who also turns out to be a Kuntala. And the thing is, I don't know why. She looks and acts more the same as the other characters, and sure, maybe that's the point. After all, Mask was in disguise before. But again, they don't really explain what it all means anyway. The only thing I can kinda get is the fact she uses her Kuntala status to get to Mask romantically. Well, yeah, looking back on it, the relationship is kinda toxic. But then we have other characters like Naruto, which also turns out to be a Kuntala. So let me get this straight. You would think this character, who's also being in the same boat as Mask and Manny, will at least say something about her own status despite working against them, but they don't delve into that at all. They had so many opportunities to explain, and yet they don't even try to examine that. In fact, I find what they were trying to say was something that's more equivalent to the class system, where being a Kuntala represents the bottom 9%, while characters like Bell and Ida represent the top 1%. But because of them not explaining things well, it made me have the wrong impression of what they were trying to say. In other words, Tomita fucked up here. I mean, it's not a good sign that not even the wiki has anything about these guys. I'm not saying their heart is not in the right place. I think it was. But the issue comes with the fact that they don't explain diddly squat in the story. And what makes it more frustrating is that his entire motivation is coming from one of the antagonists from both the series and the movies. It's really annoying, actually.